stately homes of England, how beautiful they stand, to prove the upper classes have still the upper hand, though the fact that they have to be rebuilt and frequently mortgaged to the hilt is inclined to take the guilt off the gingerbread and certainly damps the fun of the eldest son. But still we won't be beaten, we'll scrimp and screw and save. The playing fields of Eton have made us frightfully brave, and though if the Van Dykes have to go and we pawn the Bechstein Grand, we'll stand by the stately homes of England.
This is Port Eliot, the home of Peregrine Eliot, the Earl of St. Germans. It's one of a dwindling number of stately homes which has never been opened to the public. The Port Eliot estate consists of 6,000 acres between the River Tamar and the Cornish coast. Now the 10th Earl of St. Germans, he inherited the estate in 1960 when he was just 19, and set about enjoying the life of the aristocratic playboy in London, New York, and Cornwall. For a few years he held a series of festivals called the Elephant Fair in the grounds at Port Eliot, but the events were stopped after trouble with gate crashers. Lord St. Germans' life at Port Eliot is a sort of late 20th century version of the traditional aristocratic lifestyle. But aristocrats used to be public figures. They took centre stage in the national life. Now many of them have retreated behind closed doors. Lord St. Germans allowed his house and gardens to be filmed, but he preferred not to appear on camera himself. Now 56, he inherited the house and estate from his grandfather. He's been married twice and has 3 sons. The extent of his wealth is not clear. The house is vast, with 11 staircases and more than 60 rooms, but it is in a state of some decay. In 1995, the family Rembrandt was sold to the Getty Museum for about £5 million. Lord St. Germans suffers from emphysema and is waiting for a lung transplant. When he is alone, he spends much of the day surfing the internet in the morning room, where he also has his lunch.
Breakfast is at 9 o'clock. Lunch is at 1, and the cleaning of the house is done between those times. And lunch is at 1, and then afternoon tea at 5, and dinner at 8.
Same every day?
Every day.
And do you take breakfast to him in his room in the morning?
Yeah. Yeah, breakfast is served on a tray in a adjoining room to his bedroom.
And then when does he get up?
Whenever he wants to, later in the day.
In the 120-foot round room, there's an extraordinary mural by the painter Robert Lenkiewicz. It includes many of Lord St. Germans' friends and relations, and over the door, an image of the Earl himself. Lord St. Germans did allow us to record his voice. This is how he described his life at Port Eliot.
It's hard to describe. It's very difficult to tell you exactly what I do. My time is filled with my mind wandering around in this beautiful place. I've buried a few dogs. I've planted some trees. Doing nothing is my specialist subject.
He keeps himself to himself. So in behind this wall is such, it's unknown.
Yeah, it's a mystery to
It's
them,
a mystery.
It's a challenge to come in,
to get
in without being noticed or whatever.
Being called.
It's quite good fun chasing them out when you catch them, really.
Yeah.
I don't chat to him a lot, but if he talks, we'll talk back to him. And when he sees you in the garden anywhere, he puts his hand up to you, and it's always very polite.
St. Germans is not a recluse. He still has about 150 guests a year staying at Port Eliot. but he does relish being alone.
Absolutely wonderful. I can behave like the pig I am. I don't have to shave, and if I pick my toenails, nobody's going to watch. I can go to bed when I like. I can just do whatever I like. And as you know, I like to do nothing, but I can do it really sloppy if I want to. So it's a delight to be on my own.
Like his fellow peers, St. Germans' title gives him and his heirs the right to sit in the House of Lords. If a Labour government is elected, this hereditary privilege may finally end. But in the meantime, about 750 people enjoy a seat in Parliament by a simple accident of birth.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the Lord Chancellor.
Among the hereditary peers, 15 support Labour and 321 are Tories. 12 of them are in the present government. Most of the rest are crossbenchers. Britain is the only Western democracy still to have a hereditary element in its parliament. The aristocracy may no longer be a ruling class, but some of St. Germans' fellow peers are active legislators. Unlike them, he has only ever attended on a handful of occasions and has never spoken in a debate. While many hereditary peers are patrons of charities and sit on the boards of companies and quangos, St. Germans does not seek any public position. He is content with the role of private landlord.
I improve properties and let them out, and do them up and improve them and increase the rent. I understood it was going to be my property when I was about 16, and I've been king of the castle ever since.
The aristocracy has always enjoyed two great advantages: influence in public affairs and a large country house. Since the 1970s, they have been involved in a struggle to maintain both. Some of those who inherit stately homes go to enormous lengths to preserve the family house and estate. Sir Jocelyn Gore Booth divides his time between County Durham, where he lives, and Sligo in the west of Ireland, where he inherited his family property, Lissadell.
Well, Nicholas, how are you? Yep, nice to see you again.
In 1976, Sir Jocelyn took over responsibility for the family estate when his father and aunts could no longer manage it. With his agent, Nicholas Prince, he's trying to turn the place around.
Look at it, you better tell me what he...
Well, I mean, as you know, the idea is to see if we can get the old riding school back in commission, not as a riding school, but as a storage shed.
The family once had 30,000 acres and a thriving home farm. With just 400 acres left, the challenge is to make it a going concern again. There's now a clam farm on the estate.
And we've also just got the lease sorted out because there's the production company and then there's the breeding company, Lisdale Shellfish Company. And about 3 weeks ago, they gave me their final decision, so good. We're just getting the lease redrawn up to accommodate that.
Good.
Watch the loose capping stones.
Yes.
Because they...
It's better not to look too hard.
They haven't been...
Sir Jocelyn's efforts to restore the house are a labour of love.
I can't remember when I last came up. Have I been up so far this year? I didn't think I have.
No, you haven't been up since we stopped working the last autumn.
It's cost more than £60,000 to repair the roof alone.
Having done the parapet last year, it is actually now not leaking at all. But we're going to go next week, actually, Paddy and Willie, we're going to open up round the access point and do all that area.
Good.
Sir Jocelyn's father lived in the house with his sisters and then alone, until he died last year, making Sir Jocelyn the 9th baronet.
Are there any privileges or responsibilities specifically of being a hereditary baronet?
I'm pleased to say none whatsoever. Nothing at all.
But you still use the title and welcome having the title?
Yes, I suppose I do. It's always rather nice when people address you as Sir Jocelyn. But my wife, I think, takes a different view. She'd rather just be Mrs.
Do you regret that the family never had a peerage?
Of course I do, yes. It'd be lovely to be you calling me my lord and this sort of thing, but...
And you'd have relished sitting in the House of Lords? And...
Well, those are my friends and relations who do seem to enjoy it, so I can't believe that I wouldn't enjoy it. I'd love to perform some useful role if I was capable of doing so in public life, but nobody's yet asked me to, so I'm happy to do my own thing. Now I'm going to show you something that I really enjoy. This was my grandparents' bedroom, and I hope that one day it will become our kitchen. But as you can see, there's quite a lot to be done, and you may not believe it, but I have actually spent several days tidying this room, and I suspect if I was here for 6 months, it still wouldn't be finished. But there is everything in here. There are old clothes, papers, photographs, furniture, books. I even found, to my considerable satisfaction, in this old chest, a bottle of Irish whiskey, guaranteed 15 years old. Now, my grandfather died in 1944, so that must be 60 years old. There are 3 of those bottles, and I must say that gave me a great deal of satisfaction, because I have to say there's an awful lot of stuff in here that isn't as useful as a bottle of Irish whiskey. But I enjoy this sort of thing. It's something fascinating. It's like peeling an onion, you know, taking back the various layers of existence. Those look like epaulettes. That's what they are. Your shoulders, you see. And that, I think, is some sort of... Yes, sort of almost Nelson. Did you wear it like that, was it? I'm not sure. It's all splendid, isn't it? It's great fun. I mean, I love houses. I love big houses. I love big rooms. I love moving the furniture around, rehanging the pictures. And, you know, different rooms for different times of the day, different rooms for different seasons of the year. It's extraordinary how these things get into your soul. And it's very difficult to explain, but it's very important to me, and I can't explain it. The tragedy is that a house like this was built to be inhabited by an army, a large family, countless shirt-tail relations, and a huge staff. That'll never happen again. And so, of course, that raises questions about what its function now and in the future will be.
This is Chatsworth in Derbyshire, the home of the Dukes of Devonshire, one of the last of the great estates in England still to preserve the style of past centuries.
By the early 1970s, the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire had shown that it was possible to make one of the really big country estates viable in the modern era.
It's kept up by a labour force of around 150 persons, most of whom live on the estate. They include an agent and his deputy, 2 grooms, foresters, gardeners, farm workers, a school teacher and a vicar, a silver steward, 2 drainers, a curator, gamekeepers who work a year to provide 10 days' shooting, 50 building workers, 2 blacksmiths, 1 controller of the household, and a force of pensioners who live to such vast ages that they threaten to become a majority of the population. At the centre of these people, the object of their exertions, is Andrew Robert Buxton Cavendish, Privy Councillor, former soldier and statesman, 11th Duke of Devonshire, a gardener and a collector.
It is, and it's very dry. It's much the best of it. And the bit where the lupins are, it's too big. I mean, it's vast.
Yes, well,
In the 1970s, the Duke, like other aristocrats, wanted to protect his assets from the high capital taxes of the Labour government. Over the years, he passed on parts of the estate to his son and grandson. Later, he leased the public parts of the house and park to a charitable trust to protect them from the new capital transfer tax.
The most important thing I've done here is the setting up of the charitable trust, which was done in the 70s. This meant selling up a Nicolas Poussin picture and other works of art. And it does mean that the house, garden and park are, anyway for the immediate future, and perhaps a bit further than that, secure.
Margaret Thatcher's election victory in 1979 ushered in an era of lower taxes and an economic climate that proved very advantageous to landowners like the Duke of Devonshire. The Duke still had property in London, Sussex, Yorkshire and Derbyshire, all of which gained in value in the 1980s. But it wasn't just property and land prices which went up during the Thatcher years. The Duke's entire collection of neoclassical sculptures was valued at a mere £800 in the 1950s. Now, a single sculpture by Canova might fetch several million. In 1984, the Duke decided he needed to raise some cash to pay for the upkeep of the private part of his estate. He chose to sell some of his 2,000 old master drawings, including works by Van Dyck, Rembrandt and Rubens. The sale was one of the key events of the 1980s art boom.
£1,100,000. The sale of the century has just finished at Christie's in London. 70 drawings owned by the Duke of Devonshire fetched £19,611,000. Many went for 3 times the price they'd been expected to fetch.
The prices fetched, I think, surprised everybody, even all the art critics. I think art experts were very surprised. So that was really very satisfactory.
The Duke was also adding to the Chatsworth collections with some astute commissioning. He had asked his friend Lucian Freud to paint various members of his family.
And here are the Freuds. My wife, my mother, my son, one of my sisters, my other sister and myself. I don't know why I had them done. I certainly wouldn't have had them done if Lucian hadn't been a friend. I wouldn't have gone to Lucian. Indeed, these were painted in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. I wouldn't have heard of him. It was purely chance. And if you told me that I was having my family painted by someone who was going to become really famous, I just wouldn't have believed it. Mind you, by the time he'd finished, he was getting better known. But when we started, the first one was my wife. When we started, I don't think anyone had heard of him.
Whether by luck or judgment, the Duke had struck gold again. Freud's work now commands huge prices in the sale rooms. Many aristocrats were well placed to be the brokers of the art market of the 1980s and 90s. Lord Gowrie was chairman of Sotheby's for 7 years. The Duke of Devonshire's son, Lord Hartington, and the merchant banker Lord Camoys are both deputy chairmen. Lord Carrington was chairman of Christie's for 5 years.
£1,700,000.
And others have been conspicuous in the world of fine art beyond the auction houses. The Duke of Beaufort is chairman of the Marlborough Galleries in Mayfair, one of the most powerful of all the modern art dealers. And in Cornwall, Sir Richard Carew Pole was a driving force in establishing the Tate at St Ives. Last year, he commissioned a water sculpture by William Pye for the garden at Anthony House, where he lives.
There we had it. Is it catching the light?
Oh, that's good.
Is it working prettily? Yeah, it is actually.
Sir Richard is also an enthusiastic collector of contemporary British painting, and he is a trustee of the National Heritage Memorial Fund, chaired by Lord Rothschild. Anthony House is now owned by the National Trust, but Sir Richard still has 3,000 acres in the surrounding area. Land is still one of the great preoccupations of the aristocrat.
Traditionally, the landowner has managed the land in the long term. He's the owner of the land, he plants trees, he landscapes the land, and he's got the long-term interest. If you've held land from one generation to the next over centuries, one loves the landscape and the land, and all one wants to do during one's term on earth is to further enhance it.
Like many aristocrats, Sir Richard no longer lets the land to tenant farmers, but farms it himself. So he is now concerned about immediate profits as well as the long term.
All right. Good crop.
His new cash crop is daffodils.
This woodpick. 11 inches. But we haven't wasted much this year, which is nice. We picked virtually everything.
What are we over? Over 1 million bunches, are you?
Yes, about 1.2 million at the moment. That's last night.
Sir Richard doesn't just own land, he's also been a countryside commissioner, advising government on farming and the environment.
You know the first ice pond? Yes. There's a little valley that runs up from it. It's in there.
I'll go and have a look now.
Well, it may have gone, but the fox may have taken it anyway.
No, there's no
Who
foxes
knows?
here, is there?
No foxes? You tell me.
The Duchess of Devonshire, like Sir Richard, still sees herself as essentially a country person.
There are no foxes.
He's got some funny theories, though, hasn't
he?
She's actively involved in the Chatsworth Farms and writes about the countryside. She's also been president of the Royal Show. Many aristocrats hold key positions on countryside bodies. In sheer numbers of acres, aristocratic landowning has diminished dramatically over the last century. The Duke of Devonshire owned 200,000 acres in 1890. He now has 35,000. But owning land still confers considerable status. Journalist and author Anthony Sampson.
The business of landowning, I think, in terms of status, is rather separate from agriculture now. Nothing was more agreeable, after all, than to have vast acres of hill country or Scottish moorlands, which are not tremendously productive, but nevertheless are very agreeable to have. And with the shortage of land, the fact that Britain as a whole has become much more congested, and as Mark Twain said, people aren't making land anymore, that whole sense of the rolling acres, I think, has got even more attraction than it had in the 19th century.
The country estate does still exercise a special grip on the public imagination, and it's this, above all, which has been the basis of the aristocracy's contemporary role. At Chatsworth, there are more rooms for the public to see than at almost any historic house. Last year it won a Heritage Award, ahead of all other stately homes and royal palaces.
That way a little bit, I think. Just look from the end. How's that?
For the start of the 1996 season, the great dining room was refurbished. The Duchess chose the new deep red for the walls and personally oversaw the final preparations for the opening.
All complete.
Yes, Your Grace. Yes, we
never thought it would be.
A fortnight ago it looked very different, didn't it?
Absolutely, but it has been amazing.
We wondered, we've moved the two candelabra. Well, we've moved one of them onto the table at the end, Your Grace, and we've moved...
It's not in the middle, Christine, is it?
Not quite. I don't think it is quite, no, we need some.
The ceiling looks fantastic, doesn't it?
You really would think that the gilt had been done, wouldn't you? It's it's brushed out so...
And it's only been washed, hasn't it?
Yes.
But the paint's new, but the gold is washed. Morning, Anne.
Morning.
Measuring as usual.
Yes. I have to get them straight.
What do you think it looks like with the red?
It's beautiful.
Do you think?
Oh, it's a great improvement. Yes,
You really do?
I do, I really do, yes.
Have you got some big silver plates, Ian?
Yes, we've got those, what I call threepenny bit shaped dishes. You know, the big ones that go on the middle of the...
The ones with the
table.
kind of scalloped edges?
That's right, Grace, yes.
Well, why don't we try those?
Very good, yes.
Sure.
And Ian will be back when? Tomorrow?
What is today, Wednesday? You're probably back tonight.
Oh,
so you'll
fine.
probably
Yes,
be around tomorrow.
Very good, Grace, thank you.
So let's try that. Otherwise it looks beautiful.
One step, do we? One step, two steps. One step. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. We start on a new season, and on behalf of the Duchess and myself, I would like to say how immensely grateful we both are to all of you for all you do. I cannot tell you how proud we are of this house. It's the way you keep this house. It absolutely shines, it's burnished. The boards on the drawing room passage are so polished that I could shave in them. Anyway, the months ahead will be a lot of hard work for you. Thank you for all you've done in the past to keep this place so beautifully, and thank you for all your cheerful, smiling faces when I go about the house. The Duchess and I are acutely conscious of how lucky we are to live here. But my word, it wouldn't be half as much fun living here if we weren't surrounded by such marvellous people who, from the bottom of both our hearts, thank you very, very much indeed.
In her boudoir, the Duchess has a hidden window through which she can keep track of the flow of visitors.
I don't really know who made that little window, but it is genius because it's one pane from a false window, which you see from the outside. And I guess it was the Battered Duke who did it because he planted that avenue of tulip trees there, and you see straight down it. And what is so nice, if you sit at that table, you can see who's coming.
Chatsworth is in the big league in the stately home business. The restaurant has a turnover of £1.5 million a year. There are 4 shops, including a farm shop, and the orangery at the end of the public route. Together, they gross over £3 million. The driving force behind the selling of Chatsworth is obvious.
It's difficult to draw the line, really, where you're trying to support the place and making it possible for everything to keep going in the old-fashioned way. And doing your best for the place, at the same time not to overdo the commercial. But I don't think it is too much done here, myself. But I think if it's done well, then it's an asset and not a liability.
The climax of the Chatsworth season is the country fair in September. It's been estimated that half the population of this country live within an hour's drive of the Peak District National Park. This is day tripper land, and the country show attracts 100,000 visitors in 2 days.
I think most of our visitors probably come from the Sheffield area, Nottingham. They've got very, very big towns around here, a lot of huge towns. And they like coming to the country anyway and walking in the park, which they can all do, anybody can do for nothing. No charge made for that. And so it's a kind of lung, really, in this district for people. And as it's always been open to the public, it is a kind of habit. People's grandparents have been, and their parents brought them as children, and so on.
This event raised £30,000 for charity, but it is also excellent promotion for Chatsworth. In the tourism business, there are few aristocrats who can compete with the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire. But not all those with great houses made them pay in the 1980s. This is Wynyard, the home of the Marquess of Londonderry, until May 1987.
One of England's finest 19th century houses, and now it's owned by the son of a North Seaton pitman. John Hall, the man who built the Metro Centre. The paperwork was completed today, and he's enormously proud of his new home.
It's a palace, in effect. What you're looking at is a palace. And here we are.
Did you buy all the paintings that go with it?
Yes, we did. Because what you're coming to now, it's history. You're actually in the history of the North East.
Wynyard, of course, ended up with me and ended with me. After years of valiant struggle, we did try hard to keep Wynyard going, but I always knew in my heart of hearts that it was doomed. It was always the eternal conflict between living in a house and opening it to the public. Which I know there are examples where this has worked, like Chatsworth and Longleat are two examples immediately come to mind. But I'd never really worked at Wynyard.
Have you bought yourself some history here after coming from a coal mining village?
Yes, I suppose so. In many, many ways, through in the other room, there's a painting of the Third Earl. And he was the businessman, the entrepreneur. He built the steam collieries and all the railways in that part of the area. And I suppose I'm very much like him as an entrepreneur, developer, a businessman.
This was the classic case of new money usurping the old. An aristocratic family who'd made their money from owning coal mines in County Durham had been bought out by Sir John Hall, the epitome of the Thatcherite self-made man, and himself the son of a miner.
Well, bully for him. I mean, fantastic to have... he did start... His origins were humble, and he's got where he has through hard work and skill. Bully for him.
I'm going to fill in the pool, and this is going to be a conservatory, and again, for functions, because just through those doors is a private chapel.
So people will hire this out for the wedding receptions, what have you?
It's got so many uses.
I remember the morning I left, it was just an absolutely awful memory, ghastly memory, and I had to drive down here on that morning. That was awful. I just walked around looking at these empty rooms, and the remaining staff were in tears. One thing I'm glad to say is I never broke down. It was very easy to do. I did have to visit people, say goodbye to them, and one or two of them broke down. I don't know how I didn't, because I'm very sentimental, and I can break down. They burst into tears at the drop of a hat, but I'm very glad that I didn't break down there. It was, yes, awful, absolutely ghastly, but, you know, as Scarlett O'Hara said, you know, tomorrow has to be another day, I'm afraid. So I plunged on regardless. I've recreated Wynyard here, that's the thing, as nearly as I can.
In his new home, a modest farmhouse in Dorset, Lord Londonderry has created something of a shrine to the history of the Londonderry family. Memorials of family dogs were moved from Wynyard to the new garden in Dorset, and inside his new house, Lord Londonderry surrounds himself with family memorabilia.
This is a scale model of Wynyard, which I had made before I left it, and it's extraordinarily accurate. I mean, this is how it would have been finished off if I'd lived there and everything had gone differently. This is what the house would have looked like. So it's a scale model of Wynyard as it might have been if I'd lived there. Nearly everything that was in it has come down here. Practically everything. The odds and ends that you see around you, for instance, all these statues used to be in the hall at Wynyard, and whether they ever thought they would end up in a grate, I don't know, but they look rather good, I think, actually. It's a see-through grate. It's slightly different from where they were before, but I think they look all right, frankly. Here, this is a recreation of Wynyard as it was, the drawing room at Wynyard, and this is almost identical. This reminds me of Wynyard as it used to be. It's slightly different to Wynyard. The two pianos are here. It's a slightly bigger room than the drawing room at Wynyard, but that's enabled me to have virtually all the family portraits in one room. This is Frances Anne, the third Marchioness of Londonderry, and this is her aunt, Mrs. Angelo Taylor. She's supposed to be Miranda there. She wasn't an actress, but she dolled herself up as Miranda for the purposes of the portrait. She was a bit of an old battle axe from the sound of it. She was her aunt, and she didn't want her to get married to the third Marquess because she thought he was a treasure hunter, which he was in a way. But so what? I mean, he married an heiress, and he put her money to really good use. So, you know, if you marry money and put it to good use, well, what's wrong with that?
You're fascinated with your own family history. Does it also, and you're surrounded by these objects here, do you sometimes want to not be surrounded by them and not be borne down by the weight of your ancestors?
I always have been surrounded. It's too late to do anything about it now. I've been brought up surrounded by ancestors. And I'm surrounded by memorabilia, ancestral memorabilia, and nothing I can do about it now. So it's part of me. But as I say, I've got all the eggs in one basket here, which is nice.
This land in Staffordshire has been owned by the Wolseley family since before the Norman conquest. The garden park here was created by Sir Charles Wolseley in the late 1980s. But now, for the first time in 1,000 years, the family lands are in jeopardy. Sir Charles ran up an overdraft of £2.5 million to develop the 10-acre garden. The original idea was Lady Wolseley's.
My idea was not for it to be as large as it turned out to be. I just said, you know, we were going around Montesfort Abbey, where they have the National Rose Collection, which is in an old wall garden. And it was a rainy day in July, and the place was packed. And I said to Charles afterwards, I said, well, we've got a bigger, better wall garden than that. We could, you know, do a rose garden, and it sort of all started there. I mean, if I had kept my mouth shut.
But the more we thought about it, the more feasible it seemed. We're in an area of very high population here without many leisure opportunities. And I think the idea is a sound one. What was wrong was our timing, right at the end of a boom and just before a recession, which caught us out.
But I always feel a little responsible for the plight, the way it, you know, things have turned out, because obviously we never thought we'd lose everything over it.
The financial difficulties had already begun, but the opening date had been planned for the 1st of May 1990, so we decided to go ahead with that anyway. And miraculously, after weeks of rather wet, dreary, cold weather, the day dawned brilliantly bright and clear, the sun shone all day, and the temperatures got up into the mid-80s. We had about 80 old Wolseley cars, which were Wolseley registered, brought along, and a cavalcade of those. We had the band of the 10th Hussars. The opening ceremony was performed by a dear friend, Mr. Edmund de Rothschild, who owns the Exbury Gardens in Hampshire. And altogether it was a very successful day.
Enormous pleasure. Garden Park!
Wolseley Park Gardens near Rugeley in Staffordshire, there was a poet who had this great dream. His name was Charles Wolseley, of fable and history. His family have lived here since wreck was begun. While walking by the river, the idea was struck him of making a garden to please one and all.
Well, this was going to be the restaurant block here, and under the archway on the left, kitchens, toilet block on the right, and through into the courtyard here, cafeteria, cafe, light snacks and so on in this block, museum and gift shop here. But as you see, we got so far with this and couldn't finish it. And the buildings, of course, were going to be one of the main draws to pull people into the gardens.
We have not had any money since the bank cut us off on the 19th of December 1989 at 9:30 in the morning. It's a day that will live in infamy, as Roosevelt said. So no, we have just sort of been living off the land and the generosity of friends and the odd picture that Charles sells and birthday money, and it's been creative living.
It seemed to me a bit short-sighted at the time to have spent so much money and then not complete the part of it, which was two-thirds, three-quarters finished, that was going to really bring the people in and show a return on the money spent. But I don't think we lost a single camellia.
No, that's something.
Yeah, I see there isn't much bud on them this year.
Unexpected, really, aren't
No, they were trying too much stress. Too busy trying to survive to form buds. Right, see you.
After the banks withdrew support from his garden project, Sir Charles also lost control of the quarries on his land. He is now bankrupt, and the entire Wolseley estate, in the family for 1,000 years, is up for sale. Wolseley House and all its contents are on the market too.
I don't expect anyone to believe me, but we get things like anonymous envelopes that we don't even know who to thank come through the letterbox. Just the other day, Charles was standing in Safeways at the cigarette counter, and a lady came up and stuck 20 pounds in his coat pocket and dashed off, and he doesn't even know who she is.
If the house is sold, where will you live?
I don't know.
What about your son, who is due to inherit this estate as the 12th baronet one day?
He'll have to make his way in the world like all of us.
We don't know how long it's going to go on, and don't know if you'll have any money at all, whether you'll be utterly destitute, whether I'll even have my things, which would help a little bit. You can't make plans. I mean, how can you? We know we don't want to stay in this area because after being here 1,000 years, the thought of driving by it and seeing everything you've lived for and loved owned by someone else who's doing God knows what to it, it would just be too excruciatingly painful.
Curiously, the Duke of Devonshire, one of the richest and most successful of modern aristocrats, is emphatic that his class no longer enjoys significant wealth or power.
We're no longer a force, largely because of tax. I mean, the few aristocratic families have got money, and you can't have, why should you have obligations if all your money's been taken away? But you can say about the aristocracy in 2 words: they're a spent force.
The Duke of Devonshire said to us that he thought the aristocracy was a spent force in England and Britain now. Is that your view?
They wouldn't have been the words that I would have chosen. I'd be fascinated to know whether his wife would have used those words. No, I think one's got to change one's track, and one's got to do what one's good at. And the Duke of Devonshire and his wife are extremely good at showing Chatsworth to the public. I think they're brilliant at it. And in a very, very small way, I'd like to feel that I could do something not entirely dissimilar here, but it's rather a different set of circumstances.
The old aristocracy have had their day, and it wasn't that inglorious. There were inglorious moments, but it's had its day, and I think it has made an achievement it has made a contribution to the history of this country. But it's gone. Another aristocracy is taking its place, which is, as I say, a meritocracy.
But status and inherited wealth do still give access to an exclusive education and a network of connections and influence. And John Robinson, historian of the aristocracy, believes that the landed classes now deliberately play down their wealth.
One of the great achievements of the aristocracy has been a very successful camouflage attempt. There's this general view, which you see repeated again and again, the sort of agricultural depression in the late 19th century, death duties, the Liberal attack on the House of Lords, the First World War, and the graph continues downwards. But that isn't the case. I mean, most, all the great families are richer now than they were, at any time this century, and their estates are much more viable economic units than they were in the late 19th century. And all the great houses are in much better condition now than they were in the late 19th century. I mean, just to take Chatsworth, it's a much more vibrant economic force now than it was in the 1890s. The house is in much better condition and better displayed, better arranged, has far more works of art in it than it had in the 1890s.
But those big grandees want to hide their wealth now rather than boast about it.
Yes.
I think the need or the longing for people to be different, to be separate, and to have some sense of mystery about them is in some ways gets greater with this very consumerist, very commercial world that we're seeing around us. And in this morass, if you like, of money-mindedness with no particular kind of status symbol sticking out from it, a title and a certain style and a big country house and the accoutrements of that historic inheritance, that those, I think, become probably rather more important rather than less.
The next Queen's speech may well include proposals to abolish the right of hereditary peers to sit in the House of Lords. But even without this privilege, the British aristocracy will still be bound together by membership of a number of other institutions.
Lords, pray be seated.
About 40% of hereditary peers went to Oxford or Cambridge. A similar proportion joined the Guards regiments. And even among the next generation, more than 50% go to Eton.
The links between the aristocracy and Eton and the access that gives to universities and to top jobs, that has enabled them to maintain a connection with some kind of power system. I say some kind because it excludes often very important areas, including almost the head of industry. But within the world of banking, of some areas of Tory conservative politics, and certainly of local power, the aristocracy undoubtedly still does have some very key positions. Above all, in the world of art, which is now the great, if you like, the refuge or the great resting place for aristocracy in terms of jobs where they have a very, very key role to play.
They've sort of spearheaded what you might call the heritage lobby, which has been a very potent political force. You see, and instead of presenting themselves as very rich people, they present themselves as unpaid curators of the national heritage, which is true to a certain extent.
In the end, the aristocracy are marked out from the rest of us by their titles. Last summer, the Duke of Devonshire was installed as a Knight of the Garter. It's the highest order of chivalry, in the personal gift of the Queen, and all 11 Dukes of Devonshire have now held the honour, a unique record. The truth is, most people probably don't know or care much about such things anymore. But perhaps what power the aristocracy does still have ultimately derives from the rest of us. As long as we continue to treat some people as special simply on the basis of birth and title, then Britain will continue to have some sort of aristocracy.
A new 18-part series for BBC Two next, with one thing in common but very different stories to tell, a woman called Smith.